Taoiseach, here we go again. We've less than 3 weeks to go before you hand the keys of the Taoiseach's office back to Leo Varadkar, and Fine Gael Finance Minister Paschal Donoghue opens the door for the return of big pay for top bankers. It's a move that will pave the way for bumper pay increases for the top brass at bailed-out banks. We're talking about very senior banking executives who already earn €500,000. It seems that former Fine Gael ministers who slipped out of government and into the roles of banking lobbyists have done their job very, very well. And of course, nobody should be surprised, because this is straight out of the Fine Gael playbook, delivering for those in high places while ordinary people struggle just to make ends meet. This would be a bad call at any time, Taoiseach, but there is something really twisted about allowing big pay hikes for wealthy bankers while workers and families endure an unprecedented cost of living crisis. It's a real kick in the teeth for ordinary people. There was a segment on RTE radio this morning, and it was absolutely heartbreaking. It contained interviews with people who now rely on food banks to ensure that they and their children get a decent meal. And one woman, she spoke about how she'll have to go into debt on household bills to ensure that her children have a nice Christmas. Isn't that an awful dilemma for any parent? But that's the reality that people are facing as Fine Gael prepares to resume leadership of government by looking after the top brass in the banks. And we've all been here before. We've seen what gratuitous pay and self-serving behaviour of big banks, where that led us before Taoiseach. It led us to financial disaster, to economic crash and to social catastrophe. For the banks, it meant an enormous rescue package funded by public money to the tune of €45 billion. For workers and families, it meant austerity, and for the most vulnerable, it meant the most vicious of cuts. Fine Gael took away the respite care grant, the bereavement grant, and they cut child benefit. And after all that damage was done, did the banks learn their lessons? Did they? Hell no, they did not. You only have to look at the tracker mortgage scandal. Thousands overcharged for their mortgages. Hundreds of people lost their homes and lives were destroyed as a result. And even when the banks were caught red-handed, they continued to do harm. And this year alone, AIB and Bank of Ireland were fined over €197 million for regulatory breaches and actions that led to families losing their homes. And the tracker mortgage scandal isn't distant history. It happened in recent years, and to this day, not one banker has been held accountable for this scandal, not one. Paschal Donoghue's decision is essentially to reward top bankers despite all of that damage done. He is clearly completely out of touch with what ordinary people are going through. Fine Gael is clearly out of touch with all of that. And my question is simple, Taoiseach. Why are you going along with this? How can you defend this? How can you tell those struggling to heat their home or put food on the table that a banker's salary of €500,000 is not enough?
Well, in the first instance, I would say that the outcome of the retail banking review, which is an important piece of work, with about 34 recommendations. We've gone from about 13 retail banks down to 3. The banking landscape has changed dramatically. The report is worth reading, and you should read it in its entirety. Very interesting recommendations in terms of recommending to government that we would put into legislation that citizens would have access to cash, that it would be a legislative obligation on banks to ensure access to cash for citizens. And some very interesting surveys done in terms of people wanting access to cash, even though they're using more digital mechanisms. And this, of course, relates to the retail banking network and the availability of ATMs. It's a very important outcome of this review. Consumer protection, the competition issue. The future of banking is changing. Technology banks. The non-banking sector is an issue that we have to address. And these are all the recommendations that have emanated from here. Now, the opposition have decided to deal with one particular item. And again, the review recommends the introduction of variable pay of up to 20,000 and for the provision of standard non-pay benefits for all employees in the 3 banks. Now, there are 20,000 people working in the 3 retail banks. Why is the opposition and why is Sinn Féin against, and why are you trying to prevent those workers, I'm talking about ordinary workers in the banking sector, from getting a pay rise? Because that is what you were saying, Deputy. And that's what you said this morning. I mean, if anybody's trying to kick the teeth of anybody, you are kicking the teeth of the ordinary bank workers of this country. And John O'Connell, the Workers' Union, the General Secretary of the Workers' Union, workers in the banks, he is saying very, very clearly that the lifting of the restrictions on variable pay and benefits will benefit ordinary bank staff. That is what he is saying. And that is clear. And restrictions are causing difficulties with staff recruitment and retention, especially in the new critical areas of IT, cybersecurity. And remember, cybersecurity, the HSE is now estimating that cybersecurity attack on its operations last year will potentially cost up to 100 million. Compliance and legal functions. And they're competing with big banks in the international financial services sector for many of these staff. It's interesting that nearly 1/3 of workers leaving banks indicate reward as a key reason for quitting, and between 40 and 45% of workers leaving the sector who have left have received variable pay as part of their package with their new employer. Now, all of this is in the review, and that is a key issue here that the Deputy Opposite has just simply ignored because it plays well, or you think it plays well electorally, to just talk about the top brass, the big banker, and keep the debate at that level, but not look more seriously at the issues that the review brings out. There's 34 recommendations in this review, and it has changed dramatically. And the issue is, parallel with that, the government last week published a credit union bill, and Sean Fleming has done excellent work in that regard, Minister Sean Fleming. And this review says that the credit union, there's significant potential in that bank now, in terms of mortgages, in terms of SMEs, and in terms of other issues. And that is the raison d'etre. In terms of Bank of Ireland and the restriction on the higher level remuneration, that bank is now completely independent of government, has paid back everything that it was given by government. But it's independent of government.
Thank you.
We're not giving anyone any pay.
Thank you. We're over
at all.
time.
So I'm sure your newfound concern for ordinary bank workers is very welcome. The banks are, of course, profitable and should pay their staff correctly. But here's this from the review. In practice, the €500,000 pay cap applies to the few within the banks that hold the most senior management positions, such as the CEO and other senior executives. You are proposing to remove that cap, so don't create an alibi or hide behind ordinary bank clerks in a bid to defend the indefensible. I have put it to you, Taoiseach, on this specific matter, the removal of this pay cap, as though €500,000 isn't enough for a senior banker. Fine Gael, true to form, want to bust through that and go back to the bad old days, when bankers could earn obscene amounts of money in their salary, obscene bonuses, and the culture not having changed one iota within the Irish banking system. And I have asked you on that issue, how do you stand behind that? How do you defend that? This is the Fine Gael Minister for Finance's last throw of the dice in favour of the very wealthy, the overpaid, while ordinary people struggle.
I found your last comment there, in this last segment of your question, very intriguing. You were basically saying, unlike other sectors, unlike the financial services sector, that ordinary workers in the banks are not entitled to variable pay, or shouldn't be entitled to variable pay. That is clearly what you are saying, because you said they should just be paid the basic salary and that's it. That is what you said, Deputy, and it's a very important point, because that is the core recommendation from the banking review that the government has accepted. And you are saying that the ordinary bank worker is not entitled to the variable pay, or indeed is not entitled in terms of standard benefits in relation to that. In terms of the variable of €20,000 through the chair. And also, I would say, as I've said, in terms of the cap for the CEO, that relates to one bank out of this recommendation, the Bank of Ireland. One bank in relation to this. Read it, and that's exactly as it is. And that bank is not owned by the state. The state has no share in that bank. And the bottom line is this: it has to compete with other banks, bigger banks, who operate in financial services in this country, who employ thousands of people, with technology companies, who can offer far higher pay and far higher rates as well. And there is a fundamental issue there also, unfortunately.
We're moving on. Thank you. Thank you. We're moving on. We're moving on. With your cooperation, we're moving on. Taoiseach, thank you.